Good morning, Hannah.
Hi, Lise. Good morning. How are you?
With Hashem.
I'm just telling Sina to re-sign in again because I had to sign out and sign in again.
Yeah, I did also. I don't know what happened there.
Right. Okay. Okay. Sina's back. Just one second. Let me just see something here. Okay. Hi, Natalie. Hi, Sina. Hmm. Hi, Mushki. Hi, Sarah.
Good morning, hello.
Okay, we're going to start in 1 minute.
Morning.
Good morning. Is today like a video less day for everybody? A lot of people are off video.
My apologies.
Oh, hi, Sina. No problem. No obligation. No problem.
I think I'm too tired this morning.
Okay, I'm just gonna mute everybody and we will begin. Okay, so we are starting chapter 34 today. We are doing chapter 34. And in actual fact, chapter 34 marks the end of a segment in Tanya, which speaks about fighting depression and negativity. And this segment has gone all the way from chapter 26 to chapter 34. So we're talking about 8 chapters. So before we actually begin chapter 34, I'm going to do a quick recap, like a 2-second recap of each chapter, just so we know how we actually got to chapter 34. So in chapter 26, this is like brief. If you want, you can watch the recording again and you'll be able to hear the recap again for yourself. In chapter 26, the Alter Rebbe discusses material suffering that we have in this world, either because of different, tragedies, or mainly he mentions there are 3 areas in life where a person suffers, which is children, parnasa, and health. Family matters, parnasa, and health. But material suffering can cause depression and can cause sadness. And in chapter 26, the Alter Rebbe discusses the solution, that is realizing that this suffering comes from a deeper level of Hashem, deeper love of Hashem for us. And then he also raises the point that if it's from a spiritual cause, if the sadness comes from a spiritual source, the solution is to only think about it in predetermined times, not to be thinking about it the whole day to overtake your day. 27, chapter 27 discusses how you should not be discouraged by this battling sadness, because this is your mission. The mission of the potential Beinoni, of the Beinoni, is to actually be engaged in the battle. It's when we're not engaged that's the problem, and so therefore you should actually be happy about it, because this is your mission. Chapter 28 discusses distracting or strange thoughts while serving Hashem. So let's say you're in the middle of your avodah, you're in the middle of davening, And you get very frustrated because every time you open a siddur, all these distracting thoughts come along. The solution is to ignore, says the Alter Rebbe, because the animal soul becomes more active when seeing that you are involved in service of God. So the solution is just to ignore the animal soul. Chapter 29, remember, these are all reasons for why a person could be sad. Chapter 29 discusses Timtum Halev, which is the plugging of the heart, like blockage of the heart, when the divine soul does not permeate the animal soul because of a very, very thick protective klipa around the animal soul. And the solution for that is that you break the arrogance of the animal soul by thinking of the animal soul's faults. Like someone would be chopping a piece of wood to light a fire. One very big thick log is very hard to light up, but when we chop it up into little pieces, then we can light that wood much more easily. Chapter 30, we learned how to not judge others. Because when we don't judge others, that brings us to a greater humility, right? Because judging others, we've said, actually comes from, well, the root cause may be feeling inferior, but you have a need to feel superior, and therefore you judge others. And the solution is to learn how to not judge, which brings you to greater humility, because when we realize that the person who we are judging is possibly fighting a greater battle than you have to perform the positive mitzvahs, then your judgment falls away. Chapter 31 discusses merirus as opposed to atzvus. Merirus, we said that traditionally it's translated as bitterness, but it's really not the kind of bitterness that we speak about usually. It's a sadness like invigorated by action. So you can turn momentary atzvus, like if a certain sadness threatens to engulf you, you can turn it into merirus by taking action steps. So here, the Beinoni actually does tshuva with joy because he begins to identify with his godly soul. That was the beginning in chapter 31. How we get from atzvus to merirus, sadness to bitterness, is by beginning to identify, wait a minute, I'm not just an animal soul. This is not me. I am actually a godly soul. So he begins to identify as a godly soul, which brings us to chapter 32, which teaches us all about Ahavas Yisrael, love of a fellow Jew, which basically teaches us that it is our bodies and animal souls which separate us and not our souls. Because we begin to identify as a godly soul, we are able to have this love for our fellow because the origin of our souls is what unite us. What separates us is our bodies and animal souls. Chapter 33, which we discussed last week, so you see how fast this just went, is that a source of joy to combat sadness, right, which may arise because of your spiritual failings, right? You may be sad because you're not keeping the mitzvahs properly or whatever it is remembering the unity of God, Achdus Hashem, and the fact that you are part of making this world a dwelling place from Hashem. And that gives you a very joyful feeling because you're bonded intimately with Hashem as if he's like staying in your house, right, as a guest. And your joy then becomes Hashem's joy, and you develop this relationship of closeness and intimacy with Hashem. So now, chapter 34 is actually very, very practical. Chapter 34 teaches us how to be a host for Hashem. If we're hosting Hashem, how do we do it, right? So just like when you receive guests, you want to be a really good host and make them feel comfortable. How do we make Hashem feel comfortable in our homes and in our bodies? So to understand this, we go a little bit backwards and we look at our patriarchs, the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Our patriarchs were considered as a Merkava to Hashem. Now, what does that actually mean? Merkava really translates as chariot. We don't use chariots today. It would be nice, right, to go down the street in chariots. We don't use chariots, but we can understand it as a vehicle, right? We use vehicles. What is a vehicle? A vehicle has no will of its own. A vehicle goes where the driver wants it to go. So that means when we say that the patriarchs were a merkava to Hashem, we say that the patriarchs were a vehicle to Hashem's will. They did not have a will of their own. They were as if they were a chariot or a car, going exactly where Hashem wanted them to go. They were constantly united in mind and soul with Hashem. After the patriarchs, after Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, came the prophets, right? The Nevi'im. They also each united with Hashem according to their level and understanding. But the level of bitul, nullification towards God, which the patriarchs had as well, of Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet of all times, was even higher than the patriarchs and other people and other prophets as well. Because we know that Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi, that the Shechina spoke from the throat of Moshe Rabbeinu. The other prophets received prophecies in their mind and soul. So like they would go to sleep at night and have a dream, let's say, right? But not their bodies, because their bodies would not tolerate the presence of God, the revelation of Hashem, right? But by Har Sinai, for example, when the Bnei Yisrael received the Torah, Hashem actually spoke through Moshe. And what actually happened was that Bnei Yisrael were not able to tolerate. So the first two of the Aseres HaDibros, of the 10 Commandments, were spoken to Bnei Yisrael through Moshe, but from Hashem's, well, the first two actually were spoken directly from Hashem, and the nation could not tolerate it, and therefore they fainted, right? So we are told, Al kol dibur parcha nishmasan, every dibur that Hashem said, they expired, right? Their neshama just couldn't tolerate it. And then Hashem changed and said, okay, Moshe, you could say the rest of these dibros, right? So the first two were said directly from Hashem. The rest, Hashem spoke through Moshe. But we were not able to tolerate, right? We're only like the Avos and the Nevi'im, and especially Moshe Rabbeinu, were able to have Hashem's expression through their bodies. Now, because Bnei Yisrael were not able to tolerate this great revelation of God at the time of the 10 Commandments, the first mitzvah that Hashem gave them after the receiving of the Torah was v'asu li mikdash, v'shachanti b'soicham. Go make for me a mikdash. At the time it was a mishkan, and I will dwell amongst you, was in order to capture the oneness of Hashem in the physical, because really Hashem is everywhere. But Hashem chose, because this world wasn't able to tolerate this great revelation of Hashem yet, because we will be when Mashiach comes, right? Hashem revealed himself through the Mishkan and thereafter through the Beis HaMikdash. And that was the reason that this mitzvah came right after Har Sinai, because there needed to be a physical opportunity, a physical place for the expression of Hashem in this world. Now, what happens now? We don't have the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Well, this is the most beautiful part of this chapter. The revelation of the Shechina nowadays in Golus is through what we call the 4 cubits of halacha, the Daled Amos of halacha. Now, what's very, very interesting about this is that, well, firstly, wow, it's amazing. Hashem reveals himself through halacha, right? Why halacha? Why halacha? Because Torah is ritzonai v'chachmasai. It is his will and his wisdom. And that will and wisdom are enclosed in halachas. Now, very many years ago, the Rebbe said a sicha, actually on Simchas Torah, discussing why keeping halacha is so powerful. Because many people look at halacha as a lot of limitations, like a lot of rules, like, oh my goodness, I have to do this and I have to do that, and I have to, like, keep on doing things and not doing things, and measurements, and it seems very limiting, right? So at that time, when the Rebbe spoke about this, there was a new invention in the world called laser. Now, laser was a very interesting innovation because until that time we had regular light, right? And when you switch on a light in your home, the light expands. It's not focused. It's like in your living room, you switch on the light, it expands to the whole room, right? Whereas laser was discovered to be an extremely, extremely focused light, and therein lies its strength. Laser is so strong that it can cut metal, right? So the Rebbe actually explained this to us, that this is what halacha is all about. Halacha is very focused. Steam is very limited, right? When you think about laser, oh, it's very limited light. No, but it's so limited and so focused that it's very, very strong. So the Rebbe spoke about that invention in a sikha, explaining to us that halacha is so focused and so strong that when we keep halacha, it has the ability to cut through the wall of iron that separates us and Hashem. Because laser can cut metal. So it's not in this chapter of Tanya, but I thought that it was very appropriate to bring this here. Now, practically, we are not like the Avos or Moshe Rabbeinu to constantly be a vehicle, right? We have our animal soul, which is really active and driving us crazy all day long, right? So how can we be a host to Hashem, making a mishkan for him, right? Because here comes Hashem and says, oh, make me a mishkan. So again, like I said, this is a very practical chapter. So far we've heard, oh, keeping halacha makes you a host to Hashem. Besides that, the Alter Rebbe says, by studying Torah at fixed times. So according to the time available to you, like every person has different time available, and knowing that if more time becomes available, you will increase your study, right? This is actually considered as if you're studying Torah the whole time. So here we see a very interesting concept that we can elevate all our time by dedicating a portion of our time to studying Torah. It doesn't only elevate that hour, it elevates your whole entire day and experience, right? This is considered as if you're studying Torah all the time, and you will rejoice, because now we're talking about joy, you will rejoice for being a host to Hashem twice a day, an hour in the morning, an hour at night, or once a day, or whatever it is that you're capable. How can we elevate the rest of our day as well? So first, Torah learning. So the rest of the day, you're busy in mundane activities. Maybe you're striving for parnasa, or earning a living, or working in some way, or not working in some way, but you're, running your household or doing anything that you need to be doing. The way we do that also is by giving tzedakah. Yes, Sina, the Alter Rebbe is going to speak about tzedakah now in this chapter. So tzedakah also works in the same way. Very, very interesting. And these are actually like relatively very easy techniques to use to elevate our day and our lives, right? So by giving tzedakah of your earnings, and even though one should not give more than 20%, right? We're obligated to give 10%. You shouldn't give more than 20%. This portion that you give to tzedakah elevates all the other money that you have. Obviously not if you use that money for sinning, but if you use it for any necessary things that you need to buy, it's now become elevated because you took money out of it. It's like similar to one of the 3 mitzvahs of a woman, which is challah, right? When we make that dough, we just take a part of it and discard it. The rest of the dough becomes holy, right? So tzedakah represents one of Hashem's attributes, which is compassion, Rahmanis. So we say, as Hashem is compassionate, so are we. So we are imitating the ways of Hashem. And then human kindness thereby becomes an abode for divine kindness. So we're making ourselves a keli, a recipient for Hashem's kindness by showing kindness to others. Plus we're elevating ourselves and our time and our money, right? So the interesting thing about tzedakah is that it's said that mitzvah tzedakah shekula keneged kol harkabanis. The mitzvah of tzedakah is compared to the sacrifices. Now, how does this work? Because the sacrifices worked in the same way. What was a sacrifice? All living creatures were elevated through the offering of one animal. Like the purpose of animals here in this world were to be brought for a sacrifice or for us to eat kosher food, etc. But you don't eat all the animals in the world. But their whole purpose of being here gets elevated by bringing one of them as an offering. All plants in this world were elevated through the meal offering, which was flour and oil mixed together. So everything becomes elevated through one carbon. So tzedakah makes your entire day's work godly and therefore enables you to be a vehicle for Hashem's will. Interestingly enough, in addition to Torah study and tzedakah and prayer, right, all that you have eaten during the day, because food gives you energy, gets elevated because you're using that energy to learn Torah and to give tzedakah and to do mitzvahs, and you thereby elevate all the food that you've eaten and all the other parts of your earnings and all the time of your day through learning Torah. Okay, so this is really beautiful and relatively easy. And then at the end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe mentions something very interesting because, you know, there's something that the world calls today something called toxic positivity, that everything's wonderful, everything's great. Let's dismiss the negative. Let's gloss over the negative. So here we have a situation where a person was feeling sad as a result of his spiritual failings, and now we're telling him, no, 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 be happy. Everything's great. You're a host for Hashem. You think about the oneness of Hashem, study Torah, give tzedakah, and everything's wonderful. Well, guess what? In other words, up till now, we've been discussing joy to combat sadness. Joy because the neshama is being released from exile. Like we think we're sad because, oh, my poor soul is imprisoned by the animal soul. Nope, it's being released. We're doing mitzvahs. We're becoming a host. We think about the unity of Hashem and our intimacy with Hashem. And we even think about the joy that Hashem feels when we overcome the Sitra Achra. But this joy doesn't actually contradict being humble or feeling brokenhearted over one's spiritual failings. Because in order to overcome our spiritual failings, we do need to feel sad or brokenhearted about them. But here's the question. How can it both exist, right? Because the beginning of tshuva is really to feel brokenhearted, like you open up your heart to the light of the godly soul. That process is to feel brokenhearted. Again, later on in the Igeres HaTshuva, we learn how it's not all day long and it's at specific times and specific techniques, but this brokenheartedness is an ingredient for doing tshuva. And so 1 second, so can we or can we not feel sadness over our spiritual failings? So the Alter Rebbe says that yes, both joy and sadness over spiritual failings, remember it's not sadness because of some other reason, but sadness over spiritual failings can coexist by defining the root cause. How does this work? How do we define the root cause? The cause of bitterness and sadness comes from the animal soul. That's the root. And the cause for joy comes from the divine soul. And that's why they can both coexist. So there's a statement in Zohar saying that weeping is lodged in one side of the heart and joy is in the other. That's why those two emotions can coexist at the same time, because two emotions stemming from separate causes can exist side by side. But you have to be very specific to know that your sadness is coming from your animal soul and your joy is coming from your godly soul. Because sometimes the godly soul, sometimes the animal soul also feels joy. But the joy that we are talking about now is the joy from the godly soul, the Nefesh Elikis. And that's this chapter in a nutshell.
Shkoyach.
Any questions or observations? Just see the chat. I think someone sent a message. Okay, Sina. Okay.
I think it's so interesting how what we think is the priority, doing Torah and mitzvahs, which is the priority, is really only a small portion of how we actually live our day-to-day life. Most people, right? Between work and physical things, we're not necessarily engrossed. Like, we do mitzvahs all day, but we don't necessarily feel like we're being very spiritual for most of the day. But this idea that 10% or like a certain percent of, just like Meiser elevates all of our money, so too a little Torah study elevates the rest of our day and our efforts. So instead of thinking like I'm going to work and then I'm also making time for study, it's our whole day feeds into each, right? We need this for this and this for this. So it's one thing, it's not really binary.
Right, 100%. And also, I think that it's good to remember that throughout our whole day, when we keep halacha, we are then actually being a host to Hashem's Shekhinah. That for me was the most amazing part of this chapter, because we go through our day, sometimes we're so used to doing things that we're used to, we forget that, oh, actually, this is the Daled Amos of Hashem's Shekhinah in this world. So, any halacha that you keep, any brachas that you make, the way you dress, I mean, the whole day long, you daven, whatever it is that you do, you're keeping halacha. In other words, you're keeping Hashem's will. You are a host for Hashem, and you're actually creating a dwelling place for him down below.
Right, like you said, the laser, and that's everything, every phone call, anytime we don't do Lashon Hara, anytime we praise Hashem, anytime we do something, reaching out to somebody, even in business, even in work, there's still like a Jewish way of doing things, there's a halacha way of living our life, which we're so used to maybe, but if somebody would be watching us and saying, why are you doing it that way? Or most people wouldn't do it this way. And then you're like, oh yeah, but I think we're just culturally so attuned to it that we don't necessarily even
We
pay
don't realize,
attention.
and here it is.
Right.
Here it is.
It's
Like
right
this
here.
is Hashem Shekhinah. This is the Mishkan.
Yes, it's really beautiful. It's very powering.
It's beautiful. Like I got up in the morning. Like if you like get up in the morning, you're like sort of lazy to do something, whatever. Oh, it's like I'm hosting Hashem. Okay, let me do that.
Yeah,
Hannah,
you don't want to waste any second.
oh, sorry, Mushka.
Go ahead,
No,
Sina.
I'm done. Thank you.
No, I just wanted, like, what was going through my mind when I'm listening to this is that it was such a beautiful reminder to me about what started my Baal Tshuva journey, because I had no groundwork to know what was I really supposed to be doing or anything. It was a long time ago, but I remember one of the first letters that I got from the Rebbe when asking about a certain situation was the Rebbe's answer was to everything you just said, make a set time for study, and give tzedakah, and I don't remember what the third one was, but it was definitely that make a time for study, and it never occurred to me that that was like a stepping stone to anything. I had no idea. And that's what really set me off on my course of trying to find, and this is so many years ago, there was no Zoom, there was no this, there was no that. I don't even live in a very Jewish community where there's like, people all around me. And I really went out. It was really a very good, it was really beautiful. It's just like it sent me back to that beginning of this.
Beautiful.
So yeah, it's
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Beautiful and inspiring. Okay, anyone else before we?
I just have a quick question. Is that
Sure.
first I loved your review. Oh my gosh, that was great. And it always just brings me back to being present in my day. But is there what is the trick to being present in your day? Because I come to these classes, I'm so inspired. And then I go on my day and I'm always, I have to tell you, when I go to like my Pilates and I put one shoe on, the other shoe on and tie, I'm always reminded at that moment. For some reason, that's such a grounding moment for me. But really, how do you keep yourself that you really do recognize? Because it would be so elevating to think in the middle of all the craziness that you really are keeping Hashem's will.
So there's lots of different ways. You could put reminders on your phone. pop up on your screen. You're keeping Hashem's will, learning, constantly learning is the best way, in my opinion. Starting your day off with intention is a favorite of mine as well. Because once you have intention to be serving Hashem, that elevates your entire day. It means that every time you eat, walk, sleep, whatever you do, it's all to serve Hashem, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of different ways. Probably has to be individualized for each person, so there's not like one size fits all. But the whole point about living mindfully and living intentionally is to keep bringing our attention back, because our attention does wander, because we get into the day and we get involved in our whole day and we keep on doing things and we forget. And the whole point is to bring our attention back. So there could be visual reminders, things on your fridge, pop-up notifications on your phone. Today we have that, we're so addicted to our phones anyways. Let the phone tell us, some good stuff, right? Setting an alarm for just doing things that Hashem wants.
But
All
you know
different
what,
ways.
Hannah? I'm sorry to interrupt, but hi, Sarah.
Sure.
Hey, hi, Sarah. I miss seeing you. I think that just for the fact that she's putting her shoes on correctly, and I'm sure that
Yeah,
you're
I
saying
love
a
that.
bracha before anything you eat. I'm sure you're saying it after bracha. I'm sure that you're not speaking Lashon Hara because I know you. Uh, every time you're doing that, whether you know it or not, you are living the way that Hashem wants you to. So this is a sort of like a little tickle reminder this morning that everything you are doing already is intentional, even if it's not in the front of because no one has to remind you to say a bracha. You're
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 right. I
bringing
like that.
Hashem into your life because
It's
you're
become
saying
automatic.
that
Yeah.
bracha. So I
But
think that,
that's the point exactly. I don't want it to be automatic.
But I'm going to
Uh,
disagree with you there, hi Sarah.
no,
I'm go
it's okay, go on.
I'm going to disagree and agree with you at the same time. So we want our lives to be very intentional, and we want to keep thinking that we're united with Hashem, right?
Mhm,
But the truth is that when we're a vehicle, the vehicle doesn't really think. The vehicle really just, goes where you want it to go, right? So there is a Benoni that's considered to be serving Hashem and a Benoni that's not considered to be serving Hashem. So yes, we do have to not be complacent and always think about the fact that we're serving Hashem, we love and fear Hashem, etc. Those are all very important components. But there is also a benefit, the way Sina said it, there is also a benefit that to realize that you don't have a struggle in certain areas anymore, and therefore it became automatic. Because
mhm,
maybe when you were beginning your tshuva journey, let's say, right, and I never had that. Let's say you started keeping kosher, and it was really difficult. People have told me that how in the beginning it's really difficult. You want to eat something non-kosher that you really like, and it's really difficult. But then years later, it's become so automatic that it just, like my mother used to say that her car knows the way to the airport. She doesn't have to
Mhm.
it's become so automatic that you don't think about it, and that's a beautiful thing.
Right,
But we still have to grow.
mhm,
right.
We still have to say, okay, so that's become automatic, and I'm being a vehicle for Hashem's will in that way. And what else can I do?
mhm.
How else can I grow?
You know, I you just said something that I'm going to challenge a little bit is that because I also will say my car can find its way places. That's not a good thing. We have to be intentional on our drive because things can happen on our drive.
Yes and no. Yes, it's a
Okay.
good thing because it shows your progress.
Mm-hmm.
And no, it's not a good thing because you don't want to stay there. You want to grow,
Okay.
right? It's like, I don't know, I think I've mentioned this in this class. I've definitely mentioned to some people that there are 4 stages in learning. So the first stage is called unconscious incompetence,
Mm-hmm.
like you don't know what you don't know. The second stage is conscious incompetence, like, oh, now you know what you don't know. The third stage is conscious competence, where it's not automatic. You really have to concentrate. You're learning a new skill or developing a new habit. And the fourth stage is unconscious competence, like you don't really have to think about it. You don't have to think about driving a car, riding a bicycle, or making a kugel. It's just automatic. It's become part and parcel of you. The thing is that a Benoni always wants to go back to the conscious competence to grow,
Mhm.
because none of us have just already like arrived. you know? Yeah, we may have arrived in certain moments. That's why there are certain areas of our life in which we are a Benoni, like we don't have challenges in, let's say, keeping Shabbos or eating kosher, or, it's like brushing your teeth, right? But you always want to grow somewhere else, in something else, become a better person, become a better host for Hashem.
Mhm. This is a great chapter and a great review, and I think for myself, if I've ever like, I think once a month I have to listen to this
Right? It's
the
a beautiful
shiur,
chapter.
just to like kind of like every Rosh Chodesh, just like, okay, slap it together, Sina, just listen
I
again.
thought
And
the same, Sina. I thought the same. This morning when I was reading it, it gave me so much encouragement to like
yeah,
keep certain halachas that like,
exactly.
because
Mhm.
in the beginning of Igeres HaTshuva, later on, way later on, it talks about the difference between sinning or omitting to keep a positive mitzvah. And omitting to keep a positive mitzvah actually has an easier tshuva to do, but the problem is it doesn't mean that the tshuva um, is so effective, because whereas when you sin, you can transform the past. When you omit, a sin of commission and a sin of omission, right? When you do not perform a positive mitzvah because you just were lazy or you weren't in the mood or whatever it is, it's actually a lost opportunity that you don't get back.
Mhm.
So whereas the tshuva might be easier, you cannot transform the past. But when you do a sin, you could transform the past. But this chapter encourages us to live our lives according to halacha and to do all the things that a person is obligated to do throughout the day, because we're hosting Hashem. We're becoming a vehicle towards Hashem, a vehicle for Hashem's will.
Where
And
did
it's
we learn
and
that,
wow,
Chana?
and you keep halacha, Halacha is the 4 cubits of Hashem's Shechina. So wow, every time you daven, every time you say a bracha, every time you get dressed tznius, every time you keep halacha of Shabbos, every time you don't speak lashon hara, every time you give tzedakah, throughout your whole day, you're keeping halacha. You are revealing Hashem. Wow,
Mhm.
that's pretty
Chana,
amazing.
where did we learn that about what you just said? Where was that again? That we learned this.
The first chapter of Igeres HaTshuva, like how to do
Okay,
tshuva.
right. I remember that whole thing about being able to go back and repair something and then not yes, that's very,
Right,
you have to review that.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm happy everyone enjoyed,
We did.
and
I did.
we will, Baruch Hashem. Okay, so we'll see each other next week.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful week.
You too.